Mass immigration is transforming the West in ways few dare to question. This phenomenon, hailed by some as a symbol of progress, is seen by others as a threat to the social, cultural, and economic stability of our nations. To understand its consequences, we must first analyze its causes. The West faces a problem few want to address: demographic decline. Birth rates in Europe are at historic lows, and in countries like Italy, Germany, and Spain, population pyramids already show a majority of elderly people relying on an increasingly shrinking workforce. By 2050, it is projected that 1/3 of Europe's population will be over 60 years old. This demographic collapse has forced governments to open their doors to immigration as a quick fix to fill workforce gaps and sustain welfare systems. However, this solution has brought social and cultural issues that threaten to fragment our societies. Today, we won't tread lightly or mince words. We're going to analyze the facts that many prefer to ignore: the lack of academic preparation that prevents the integration of millions of immigrants, the formation of ghettos dividing our cities, the socio-economic impact perpetuating inequalities, and the rise in crime rates that concerns all of Europe. In Europe, the most profound issue behind immigration is neither political nor cultural. It is demographic. Fertility rates in almost every European country are well below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. In countries like Italy and Spain, this figure barely reaches 1.3. The result is an inverted population pyramid, a majority of elderly supported by a steadily shrinking workforce. This imbalance threatens the sustainability of pension systems, healthcare services, and overall economic productivity. To compensate for this decline, governments have turned to immigration, bringing in millions of young workers from developing countries. While this solution seems logical in theory, it has in practice created a series of structural problems that have tested the cohesion of our societies. One of the most urgent problems with mass immigration is the lack of academic preparation. Millions of immigrants arrive in the West without the educational tools to integrate into the labor market. Not because they don't want to, but because they come from regions devastated by conflict, extreme poverty, or collapsed educational systems. In countries like Sweden, Germany, or France, these educational gaps have created a precarious working class. Without access to adequate training, many immigrants are forced to take low-paying jobs, or worse, rely on welfare systems, which generates tensions with native populations. This vicious cycle of poverty, lack of opportunity, and exclusion perpetuates a larger issue: cultural and social segregation. Major European cities are seeing the emergence of ghettos, urban areas where immigrants cluster, and cultural integration halts entirely. This is not just about demographic concentration. It is about communities operating outside the values, norms, and systems of the host country. Rinkeby in Stockholm and Molenbeek in Brussels are examples of this segregation. In these areas, the local language is not predominant, unemployment rates are alarmingly high, and the cultural values of origin dominate over those of the host society. These neighborhoods are not just a symptom of social exclusion, but also hotspots of cultural tensions. Rather than acting as a bridge to integration, they become insurmountable barriers between immigrants and natives. The cost of mass immigration is not just cultural, but also economic. Unemployment rates among immigrants are consistently higher than among natives, which is not surprising given the lack of training and language barriers. In Sweden, for example, immigrants represent a disproportionate percentage of those relying on social assistance. This generates resentment among local populations who feel their taxes are being used to subsidize failed integration efforts. It doesn't stop there. The concentration of poverty in vulnerable areas lowers the quality of life for everyone, creating fertile ground for social exclusion and conflict. One of the most controversial topics is the link between immigration and crime. In Sweden, a report by the National Council for Crime Prevention found that individuals of foreign origin are 2.5 times more likely to be suspected of crimes than those of Swedish origin. This risk increases depending on the type of crime. Immigrants are 4 times more likely to be suspected of lethal violence and robbery, 5 times more likely in cases of sexual offenses, and 3 times more likely in violent assaults. In 2020, Sweden recorded 366 shootings, a historic record, many of which were linked to gangs in areas with high immigrant density. This is not a phenomenon exclusive to Sweden. Similar patterns are reflected in statistics from France, Germany, and the UK. This is not about demonizing immigrants. The statistics reflect a structural problem. The lack of integration and precarious socioeconomic conditions contribute to the growth of criminal activities. When communities feel excluded, crime becomes an outlet, and tensions with the local population increase. Poorly managed diversity is not a new phenomenon. History offers clear examples of how empires like the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, and Austria-Hungary collapsed under the weight of internal diversity. Rather than finding unity in diversity, these empires faced insurmountable cultural and ethnic divisions. The lack of shared values doomed them to collapse. Today, the West could be walking the same path. The question is, can we learn from these mistakes, or are we destined to repeat them? Immigration doesn't have to be a threat, but poor management turns it into a crisis. Without effective integration, our societies face an uncertain future, marked by divisions, inequalities, and constant tensions. If we want to preserve our cultures and communities, if we want to avoid demographic collapse and reduce violence in our streets, we must invest in increasing fertility rates. Restoring the ethnic majority in our societies depends on this, achieving and even surpassing the maintenance level of 2.1 children per woman, rejuvenating and strengthening our nations. This does not mean shutting the door on immigration, but rather balancing demographic policies and reinforcing the values that have defined our nations. We'll talk more about this proposal in an upcoming video, but for now, let's reflect on the steps we can take to build a cohesive and sustainable future for our demographics. If this topic has made you reflect, share your opinion in the comments and subscribe.